Good evening and welcome to the studio once again for the second time today, Daniel. Now, before we have a chat, Daniel, just a quick intro. Daniel is from Collective Shout as a youth advocate, educator and event host. Now, Daniel partners with schools and communities to challenge porn culture and the sexualisation of women and girls. Daniel works with young men across Australia to reimagine healthy expressions of masculinity and manhood. Got so many questions this morning, Daniel, so we thought we'd be back tonight and dedicate the next hour continuing those discussions and maybe going a little bit deeper and a bit broader than we could have done this morning. So welcome.
Thank you so much, Mike. It's good to be here, and thank you so much to the listeners. I really appreciated the questions. You know, there was some really good content to dive into there, and hope tonight can be beneficial for everyone.
Absolutely. Now, I was keen to ask you this question this morning, but we sort of got caught up with so many questions, which was a good thing. Now, in your opinion and expertise, how do you define? We've been talking about toxic masculinity. How would you describe it?
It's a great question, Mike. And it is important to define that. It's important to unpack it. And I think if we don't, the result is that people misinterpret what you're saying. So to the listeners and to everyone listening in, I want to be clear that when we use an expression like that, it's not actually saying that masculinity in itself is toxic. And a better way, and something that I use with the boys in particular, so I actually don't use that phrase because I realize it is quite loaded, and if someone doesn't understand it, it can be another hurdle to engage with a really important conversation. So in my mind, what we're actually talking about is the toxic or stereotypical or harmful ways of expressing being a man or expressing your masculinity, which look like control, dominance, coercion, manipulation. So using your manhood to diminish the other people's dignity, space, voice in the world. And so that's what we talk about when we talk about the toxic elements of it all.
Okay. I'm going to pick up some questions that we had from this morning. We had a great question from Monica this morning. She was asking about regarding the way a lot of girls dress, I guess particularly in their teenage years. Do you get a lot of questions about that? When you go out and talk to schools, particularly to either the boys or the girls, I guess?
Yes, I do actually. Yeah. So in my time here in WA, I've had both the boys ask me about that and what my thoughts are. And just recently at an all-girls school quite close to here, I was also asked by year 8 and 9 girls what I thought about, what they should or shouldn't wear. Okay. And I obviously don't go in there, and I just want to be clear, everyone listening at home, I'm not here to mansplain and tell young girls what they should or shouldn't wear. But what I do think is important is if we actually unpack what's happening culturally and socially where girls and boys feel the pressure to conform to certain ways of being. Why do young women and young men feel they need to overly sexualize themselves, their conduct, their conversation, how they relate to one another? And so I think for me, I have a great deal of empathy for these young girls who are trying to negotiate a culture that esteems them and puts them on a pedestal for being sexy or being good looking or being, sexualized, and so there's rewards and there's payoffs for that, because as a culture, we're pretty disordered on that, in that that's what we value young women for. And whenever I'm in schools with the young girls, we do an exercise where we actually unpack what young girls are valued for and what they should be valued for. And the first board would horrify you, the things that they come up with, because it is all about...
Like what? Come on, let's really unpack this tonight.
So one of the ones that you can read on my article for Eternity that I wrote probably a couple of months ago is I was unpacking this at an all-girls school in Sydney. And the first thing they said, this is year 9 girls, they said big boobs.
Wow,
That's the first thing. And before I had even a chance to write that up on the board, a loud voice at the back, love it, yells out, virgin whores.
Wow.
I mean, let that sit with you.
Okay.
That's a year 9 girl realizing that there's this dynamic of that young girls are supposed to be innocent and alluring in that way, but then they're also supposed to present as sexually promiscuous and available. So I think, goodness me, the pressures and challenges on young girls trying to negotiate that, and my heart just goes out to them. And so I had this conversation here in Perth with about 12 to 15 young women after the session. We were in the auditorium, and I said to them, girls, when you go out shopping and you look at what's available, do you feel like there's a lot of choice out there? Are there lots of options for you? And they said, no, not really. A lot of it is quite revealing. And I said, oh, okay, interesting. And then I said, so even if you could buy what you wanted, if you can imagine your Saturday night outfit in your mind, and that's what you want to wear out. And do you feel that you would have the permission to wear that, by the social pressures around you? And they said no. So in my mind, are you then doing that through an empowered free choice, And in particular, it came around bikinis, where a young girl said, yeah, I want to wear a one-piece bathing suit. She's 13, 14 years old. She said, but I feel the social pressure that I got to wear a bikini.
Wow. Even though her first choice would be
that.
And to wear a one-piece.
And so that's where I want to kind of bring that conversation back to, is it's like actually saying, is there a way that we can give young women the space to be valued for other things, their creativity, their gifts, their sporting abilities, their academic pursuits, their desire to make a difference in the world, their faith, whatever it may be. Can we value them for that,
Daniel, we've got some more questions coming through that we came through on our Facebook page a little bit earlier. Now, this person says, you may be aware of the collection of stories from New South Wales young women documenting their experiences of rape, sexual assault and sexual harassment at the hands of their classmates, and the petition calling for better consent education. Do you think consent education is enough to address this issue? This has been coming up a little bit over the last few weeks. What's your thoughts on that?
Thank you for that question. I really appreciate it, and I think it's an important discussion. And I just want to start by acknowledging both Chanel and all the young women and some young men who have responded to that petition, which has had thousands and thousands of both current and former old school girls from those schools in Sydney, document their sexual assault and sexual harassment and rapes, and it's so grieving. I know Melinda and I and the rest of the team have read through some of it, and it's really heartbreaking seeing those stories, and I think it's tragic that it's had to take that, for this to finally be recognised. My heart goes out to Melinda and the team who have been doing this a lot longer than me, who have been highlighting these issues and wanting to draw attention to it for so long and being dismissed. And it's tragic that it takes, the trauma and heartache of young women at this scale before people stop and go, hey, what's going on here? And for me, the boys kind of know that I'm coming to speak to them a little bit about this, especially from the private schools. And it is part of the kind of social understanding going on at the moment, not as much in Perth, but certainly in the eastern states. And what I do want to say is that I'm all in favour of we need to talk about consent, and I think it is such an important consideration in this topic. And I think the important understanding for consent is it's so much more broader than just about sex, and it starts so much younger. It's around things like not forcing children to hug or kiss strangers or relatives that they don't feel comfortable with, and having bodily autonomy from a very young age. And I think that's really important and a necessary part of the conversation, as well as on so many other levels around what we consent to in day-to-day life. However, and I do want to say this strongly, I think people who are just calling for consent as the latest buzzword to fix this problem have completely misapprehended just the scale and the cultural forces at hand here.
So it's not just about consent. It's much broader.
It's so much. Consent education is like slapping, as we would say, a band-aid on an axe wound. And the reason I say that, and the reason I say that so strongly, is because when you have, and I'm going to go there, when you have pornography, which we know that countless young boys are watching, and young girls, but not to the same extent. And we're not just talking about naked pictures of people. We're talking about some of the most degrading, obscene things that have ever been produced, where there is no consideration for someone's integrity, bodily autonomy. There is no such thing as consent. And in actual fact, the whole idea is to titillate male entitlement and to think that women are available for sex anywhere, anytime, anyhow. And in my mind, if young boys tragically, are renewing their minds and having their minds shaped by that, potentially for hours a day, and that is the cases in some instances. There are boys, there's about 20% of young boys watch pornography every single day.
Hang on a minute. Did you say hours a day?
Hours a day.
Are we talking high school kids?
We're talking high school kids, yeah.
What sort of age are we talking about here?
We're talking from about the age of 11, 12 upwards. Yeah.
Okay. I'm having trouble believing what I'm hearing, but sorry, keep going.
So
okay.
I'll even highlight, I've had really good young boys even on this recent trip. I'm talking some of the best young boys I've met open up and tell me afterwards that, they were struggling with porn addiction when they were 12 years old, year 7.
11 and 12-year-old boys just so I've got this again, clarifying this, are watching a couple of hours of porn a
Some
day.
of them, not all of them,
But
but,
yeah,
if it occurs, yes.
It just makes me angry, to be honest.
It should. I think it should. The problem is I think we've been too polite and we haven't called this out as the older generation. To be honest, we've allowed younger people to be groomed by a $150 billion global industry run by pimps and traffickers.
How do they get access to it, though?
It's everywhere.
Well,
It's everywhere, and that's what I say to the boys. You know, I want to come back to the consent education point, and then I'll jump back to the mobile phone and where we go from there. But the reason I say that consent education can't keep up with this is because if their neural pathways, if they're getting dopamine hits on some of the most degrading, violent content that completely disregards consent. I mean, it's not even looking at things like intimacy and mutuality and preferencing the other, or looking at whether the other person is enjoying pleasure from this. It's completely about self-gratification, you know, and if your mind is being renewed on that, and as I said earlier, in terms of the stats have categorically proven that people that watch this and imbibe sexualized material have a diminished view of women's humanity, competency, and morality. That's a toxic combination. And with all due respect, I don't think a consent class, no matter who delivers it and how good it is, one a year, twice a year, can compete if that is the social fabric and the conditioning going on. And for me, it's propaganda. It's complete conditioning that goes on and rewires people's brains, and it can't keep up. So that's why, as we said earlier, we need to actually tackle this at a political level. Governments need to step in. We need to have, you know, blockers in homes and in schools, because kids can access this anywhere, and that's the tragedy of it all.
How easy is it for kids just to? Do they stumble across it, or do they go searching for it? How does
There's pop-ups, you know. I can only speak from my experience. So when I was 10 years old, I was exposed to porn from an older family friend, you know.
Okay,
and that was, you know, that was a long time ago. That was before we had smartphones. That was before we had the accessibility that we have now. And it's part of my story and why I'm so committed to combating this, because, you know, that had then shaped my mind, and my little brain couldn't keep up with what was going on there. You know, and so young boys tell me, you know, they're watching the cricket, or, you know, they're engaging with friends, and they either get sent it by someone, or it pops up, or do you know what? It's okay that kids are curious about sex. You know, it is normal to want to understand these things. But if you go and look online, it's a tragedy. So I've had friends who tell me that their 7, 8 year olds have, you know, looked up because they were curious to understand about sex and babies, and they discover pornography. We've got even stories, and it's part of the parent session that Melinda delivers, you know, where we've heard stories where kids have been looking up Shrek or cupcakes because they wanted to make cupcakes, and all of a sudden cupcakes leads you to a famous porn star, apparently.
Oh my goodness! Can you just clarify pop-ups for those listening? And I'm not that familiar. Can you explain what that is? Because I'm just thinking about my grandkids that are around that age.
Yeah, so they could just be sitting there on any particular website, especially if it's like a gaming one. If it's not a, you know, if kids are just going exploring for things, and, you know, pop-ups can come. It can entice you for gambling, for pornography, or what have you. But they exist. These people, you know, come after you, and as we say, you know, and this is the tragedy, and it's heartbreaking to continue to say this, but like, I have to say it, and we have to continue to say it, because it's kids' well-being and lives that we're talking about here. Is that it's not a matter of like when kids discover porn. It's like porn is coming after them. This is an industry that preys, because they know if they can get people hooked, and it's an addiction, and that's how it's now being discussed in academic literature, is if you can get hooked to this, your brain continues to want more and more dopamine to keep up with it, to get that same rush, to get that same pleasure hit, which unfortunately just leads people down into really dark and depraved places.
What's the feedback been like of some of the boys that have where the pennies drop, the light's gone off and they've realised what they're into is not good?
Yeah, fantastic.
Can you just move that microphone up a bit, mate? That's it. Yeah, that's better.
Forgive me. There we go. I hope everyone can hear me.
Yeah, we need to hear you.
So good. All right. So for me, the most encouraging was when I had a 14-year-old boy acknowledge that he could see the link between human trafficking and pornography.
Oh, wow.
That he
14.
That he made that connection, and that's what I was saying earlier, and I'll continue to say, is once we give young people the opportunity to dissect these toxic cultural messages, they really get it. They understand that this isn't right, that it's harmful for them and the society that they're a part of. And so those moments are just absolutely fantastic. But some of the other ones are a bit more heartbreaking is I was at a school recently, and two 14, 15-year-old boys separately approached me after the session, and the moment I looked at them, they just broke down crying, and for them it was because they had stumbled across pornography at about the age of 11, and it wasn't something they were looking for, and this young boy was absolutely devastated. He's decided, I don't want to watch this, but it becomes an addiction. He's 14 years old. His parents don't know, and that he's struggling with this, and the poor young fella is just breaking down crying, and so that for me is why we do this, because we need to make sure that he doesn't see it in the first place, but that we then do something to give these young men an opportunity to go and get the help they need. And the great thing was, this was a school that had a few psychologists, so I could connect him with chaplains, with the psychologist, and connect him in to go and get the help that he needed. I obviously encouraged him to speak with his parents, and I hope that has happened, and that they could have that conversation, and again that they would do that with grace and with poise, and not to shame him, because he already was feeling a lot of shame, this young man. He was devastated at what he had seen and how much it had robbed from him.
Incredible. Daniel, what are some of the other challenges apart from what we've been talking about tonight, in particular this porn culture, if you like? What are some of the other things?
I think just social media in general is hard for young people. A colleague of mine has just finished his PhD at the University of Sydney, where I studied over East, and his findings are shocking, but they're necessary. And in essence, what he says is that the combination of social media and pornography decreases the capacity for empathy in young people. Well, all people, but...
Sorry, could you just repeat that again?
The combination of social media and pornography is decreasing the capacity for empathy in young people, or anyone that is on their phone so much. And that for me is such a worry. He goes on to say that it leads to poorer social conduct. They are also more likely to sexually objectify women and have higher rates of narcissism. Wow. Which is tied up in that toxic combination. And this is a challenge, and that's why I say to the kids, and to come back to my point earlier, is when I go into the schools, I ask them, hey kids, do you know what phone I had when I went through high school? And they laugh and they yell out all these things, Nokia, and then we get to the fact that it was a Nokia 3310, and we have a little chuckle, and then I use that though to make a very important point, which is they have a smartphone with the whole internet at their disposal, 24/7, Wi-Fi, and it's never more than a click away, And I don't know if people have explored this, and how much these programs continue to try and get people to come back on them, And so these young people are requiring just extraordinary amounts of virtue and resilience, to push back on these things, because they're challenges we didn't have to face. I'm so grateful I didn't have a smartphone when I went through high school. So there's that element to it, as well as the bullying and what goes on in terms of, sometimes the messages that they send to one another.
Daniel, we've got some more questions coming through. We'll try and get through these before we wrap up at 8 o'clock. Thank you, Sophie, for your question. Sophie says, how should we go about making sure our kids are safe online, but in a practical way? I honestly don't even know how I would go about talking with young kids about this kind of topic. It seems so overwhelming, but so incredibly important at the same time. Can we move into some solutions, some practical things as we head towards finishing off?
Thank you, Sophie. Thank you for your honesty.
Just pop that mic up a bit, Daniel.
Oh, gosh, sorry.
That's all right, that's right, mate.
Doing this.
Yeah, that's it. We want to hear you.
Oh, that's great.
Here we go.
Thank you, Sophie, for your honesty, and appreciate it. Like these aren't easy conversations, and I acknowledge that I'm not a parent. I just kind of have these conversations and come in like a bit of a wrecking ball at the teacher-parent sessions that we do in the evenings. In terms of practical ways, I think there's things like Family Zone, which I think is a great piece of software to install in the home. Some schools offer it to their families, but if not, I think it's an investment. I just think making sure kids don't discover this is really important. I think obviously I'm not going to tell people how to parent, but boundaries around how much time do the kids get on iPads and phones? Do they have to put it down? Because it obviously impacts more than just these topics. It's about making sure they get enough sleep. It's making sure that their mental health is okay as well to get through the day. The gossip and the banter can wait till tomorrow. tomorrow, as far as I'm concerned. But in terms of talking about these topics, Melinda actually has some fantastic resources on her website, which will pop on the 98.5 chat.
Now, just on that, so Melinda is part of Collective Shout. So if you're listening, wondering who Melinda is, and we will put some links up to that on our website as well.
So there's a couple of fantastic books called Good Pictures, Bad Pictures, and another one that is exactly what it says on the tin, How to Talk to Your Kids About Porn. And they're really simple, they're really accessible, and I think it's just so important to obviously be having these conversations. I'd also, if I can plug us, Sophie, is when we're back here in August, it'd be wonderful. You're more than welcome to get in touch with us and come to one of our parent sessions in the evening. So we're always welcoming, guests to those as well.
So you run those?
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's specifically targeted for parents?
That's right.
Okay, and those types of things is what you would talk about in those types of nights?
That's right. We're trying to equip parents with what's going on, and then resources. So yeah, on a good day when we engage with a school, we speak to the students, we speak to the teachers, and then we speak with the parents in the evening. And obviously it's a collective, community approach.
It is interesting. Thank you, Sophie, for your message. As a grandparent, I wouldn't even know where to start. So it is quite challenging, even know not only what to do technically, but even know how to start those conversations, Daniel. Like, how do you even begin those conversations with teens?
Yeah, it's great. From my perspective, and to echo what I said earlier today, I'm very much encourage people to get a sense of where their children or where their teenagers are at, asking them questions, because that way, you can find out what they understand and what they comprehend about these subjects before you give them information that's either not adequate, so then they'll check out and it's not going to meet them for the challenges that they're at, or if it goes too far where they don't need to hear about it right now. So I think it's good, it's especially young kids there, where do you think babies come from, have you seen any pictures online that have made you uncomfortable or made you feel unsafe or scared, I think there are tactful ways, and definitely the resources available that we have and that we do sell at our parent sessions are really helpful to be able to broach these topics.
I guess just to finish off tonight, what would you say to many parents and grandparents like myself as a way of encouraging them to help have these discussions, healthy discussions in our homes?
It's a great question, and it's so important. I would just say not to panic, The best thing is when we do run our parent sessions and they go away and they tell us they feel so much more equipped and with a greater resolve that, yes, this is a problem, but there are actually so many practical things that they can do to get involved, to make a difference. And whether that's obviously in the home, resources that are available, how to manage, social media and internet filters, all the way from, taking action politically. Sign up to Collective Shout. Look at the fantastic work that they're doing to call out, politicians, organizations, corporations, media advertising that's, profiting off the sexualization of girls and objectification of women. Like, we all have been too polite, but I think when you take action, you feel empowered and you have that greater resolve that there is something that we can actually do.
Just on that, I didn't realize that. So Collective Shout, you actually will almost lobby a lot of... I didn't realise that.
Yeah, so I don't personally do that, but some of the most extraordinary women, and let me shout out to you all this evening, Caitlin and Lynn and Melinda, they just do extraordinary work. They just hold these corporates to account. Some, I don't know if you've heard of Amazon and Instagram and Alibaba before, but these corporations have sold some of the most vile things that you could ever imagine and allowed children to be groomed, and they've called it out. They've asked for reforms. They've exposed these things through social campaigns, and so there's that way to be involved in these things as well.
So just on that, so is that a more beneficial way to do it rather than thinking how do I approach my local member for example?
I think it's both.
Because it's sheer numbers.
Whatever you feel comfortable with. Ultimately, we need a cultural reformation. We need a huge shift on this. And ultimately, it's like, I want people to stop watching porn, not because they feel ashamed, but because they see the inherent dignity of themselves and another human, and therefore there is no way they could take any pleasure from their degradation and exploitation. That is the hope. That's going to take everyone collectively acting towards that end. And that for me is we get to play one small part in that. And so I would say lobby your MPs if you feel comfortable, take on a campaign, call it out, don't walk past this stuff. The standard you walk past is the standard that gets set, like that. And I feel that, I've felt that challenge for me as a man to not be a bystander, and that's where we can actually take heart, is exactly the same that I exhort the young men to use their courage, to use their masculinity for good. We all can do that as parents, as grandparents, as neighbors, as friends, as older siblings. Like, we all should be acting courageously for this end. And I think that is where we can see a lot of difference. And I also don't want to neglect the fact that there are so many good people who are being good enough mums, good enough dads, loving one another, loving their kids. And obviously that is the most important thing that these children need, is a safe and loving home where they can talk to whoever their carer is, about what's going on in their lives, that they would have support, that they could talk about these things. Because as I say to the kids, I would love to wave a magic wand and make all of this go away, that you young girls could be able to wear what you wanted and exist with freedom and know that you are safe when you go out. I'd love to be able to make that happen. I can't, but what can we do to get us to that point? What can we do to fight back on this and actually advocate for people who don't have a voice? So young girls haven't felt they've had a voice. And for me, the greatest thing to take hope in is that this shift in this season right now is a real moment where young women are having a voice and they're finally feeling like people are going to get held to account on these things. And I think we owe it to them to hear them and to respond. And to be unrelenting on that. And that, I feel, is a challenge towards myself. And now I've said it on radio. So, now I have to live that. But yeah, parents, we're here for you. We want to support you. We are all in this together. It takes a village. It's not just a cliche. And so we look forward to partnering with you, with schools, and coming back here and doing all that we can to address this issue.
Daniel, I love your passion. I love your drive. We are, can you believe it's nearly 8 o'clock? We could go for another couple of hours.
I'd love
quite
that.
easily, but we do need to do the right thing and finish up at 8. We really appreciate you coming in, not only tonight, but also thank you for joining us this morning as we started this conversation just after 10 o'clock this morning, and we felt it was so important that we needed to open it up and continue that discussion tonight. So thank you very much, and on behalf of Collective Shout as well. So thank you so much, and we'll put up all those links on our website. We'll either get that done tonight or first thing in the morning. Once again, thanks, Daniel.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.